Hi, it's Steve Hargadon and Reed Hepler, and we're here on Tuesday, September 17th, 2024 to do This Week in AI.
Hello,
Hello,
everybody.
Reed.
It's been a crazy week and a half. We didn't do it last Friday, but we're doing it today, and it's been a lot of advancements for ChatGPT, I guess for OpenAI. Google and Apple have had major advancements, and I think we've experimented or heard about all of them. We have OpenAI O1, we have Google Notebook LM making podcasts, we have Apple Intelligence. So we're just going to take it away and talk about the advancements and then how it's affecting the workplace and potentially safety, what people's plans are for our safety. So the first one is iPhone 16, which it's crazy that the iPhone has 16 generations already, like insane. Like it was 2004 when it had its first one, so just mad. But Apple Intelligence is going to be in the next iPhone. So what have you heard about that? And what are your thoughts on that?
I'm woefully ignorant as an Android Chromebook fanboy here. I do appreciate Apple's thoughtful determination to use very practical and pragmatic aspects of AI
Mm-hmm.
so that it can get things done for people and to be concerned about privacy. You're going to have to let people know what the advancements are, but I will say I like Apple's approach.
Mm-hmm. So Apple Intelligence, what they're doing primarily is they're not. It's kind of like the public release of what they've been talking about all along. They are going to have little mini AIs that's going to be in their tool in their phone, and it's going to be an AI with each specific app. But they're calling it Apple Intelligence as if it's one big huge thing because that's what everyone is expecting. But like with the writing tools, they're going to have a text rewrite. So it's basically kind of what ChatGPT and what other people are doing, but it's instantaneously in your email rather than having to go to ChatGPT and drag it over to your email. Proofreading, kind of a grammarizing thing. It can summarize long things. It can make lists out of paragraphs. Um, and then you have your typical smart reply as well. They also have their own language model, which I think is just ChatGPT 4.0 in a wrapper, but they're calling it their Apple large language model. But it seems really like ChatGPT 4. Then they also have things you can do with your photo. It can delete objects in your photos, so it can like just do a basic kind of Photoshop in your phone, not even in your computer, but in your phone without you even asking it to. It can ask you if you want that. It will also record your phone call. Finally, and this is not enough for me to go from Android to Apple. I'm a diehard Android fan, but it will record your phone call without the scratchy stuff, and it can transcribe your phone call as well. So
So, Rita, I
just
want to ask a question.
mhm.
It feels like with Web 2.0, there was a moment at which all of the promises had to kind of winnow down to what was actually practicable,
Mhm.
right? Or practical. So I feel like there are so many promises to AI, and I have a Samsung phone, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of AI built into it that I'm not actually using.
Yeah.
In theory, I love it,
Yeah.
but in actual practice, I'm not using it. So
No.
it feels like at some point there's going to have to be a reshaping of priorities based on not what we would say we would want or we like, but on what we actually end up using. It's almost like our attention can't match the number of options available. That ultimately we're just human beings with a limited amount of time and attention. And so I'm really curious, but I think that's part of why I like Apple's strategy so much is this focus on the practical, because
Mhm.
I love what Samsung did, but I never use it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just not a practical thing sometimes to use all the features that they have. It's just
Well,
odd.
I have limited time and attention, and in fact, some of the things that I end up using are counterintuitive. The tool I've
Mhm.
been using the most lately is called Tube on AI, and it summarizes YouTube videos. And so the summarizing of YouTube videos into 3 or 4 minute audio clips and the
Mhm.
summarizing of longer articles and books into shorter pieces,
Mhm.
those have turned out to be enormously practical for me. and I'm not really using Ideogram, although you and I both used it and got an account and love it.
Mhm.
But it'll be interesting to me to see how this shakes out.
Yeah,
What do we actually have the attention for?
yeah, that's true. Well, and there's a lot of things in education people are talking about, like you need a lot of student attention to AI tools, and a lot of people are finding that students are actually turning away from AI tools because it takes too long for them to create responses, and they're like, if it's not done within 20 seconds, we don't want to wait around for it, and it's just crazy. That's related to students'
Yes.
propensity to not read and have, critical reading skills, but that's a whole different story. Related to that though, a little bit, OpenAI O1 preview was released, OpenAI O1, and that does take more than 20 seconds to do things because it's thinking and it's bouncing things between different AI models and their abilities. And there are some that are text and some that are data, and then it queries data things, and then it finally spits out its self-quality checked response to you. Have you used O1, and what are your thoughts on that?
I've used it, and for me, it's not made a very big difference. The
Okay.
downside for me with it is it doesn't let you upload documents, and
Okay.
so
Yeah.
I think we're getting reports that it's equivalent to an IQ of 120, or that it's like somebody who's 60% of people who are in a PhD program. We talked about this idea of a corporate structure from that article. I can't remember who the author was, but this
Yeah.
idea that you have multiple independent units that cross-check each other. And in my very simplistic way, that's what I'm thinking this new version of ChatGPT is. It's doing its own checking against itself, so it should be more accurate. And I think probably it's going to have a huge impact on programmers and programming, and the need for programmers versus just asking the AI to do it, and other kind of technical tasks like that. But I'm not actually using it when I use ChatGPT right now because I really have depended on this feature of uploading content and getting summaries of it.
I'm trying to find the author of that article, but yes, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting to see. Again, it's all about those abilities of what exactly is usable and what it's not usable, and what are we going to pay attention to. And right now, reasoning, well, quote unquote reasoning, like they say they have, is not really going to be the big thing. It seems
Well,
like.
maybe it will be. I mean, I guess so. The guy at Google who was the whistleblower,
Mhm.
Zach Voorhees, has come out and said, there's something really interesting here. Once you have an AI that's reasoning, then what does that do to propaganda? Meaning there is a lot of politics that we accept is not actually accurate, but is used for purposes of persuasion. And so
Mhm.
if you actually had a full reasoning AI, that can study the scientific data, that can study the the medical reports, that can actually drill down on data and tell you the actual employment numbers versus what the government wants us to think the employment numbers are. Is there going to be a little bit of a crisis here of a fully reasoning AI again with the conflict with the narrative stories that are told about certain things? I mean, I think we accept that the economy, there are stories about the economy in order to keep us feeling positive about the economy. And so when you actually have an AI that can see through that to the core data, what will actually happen?
Yeah, who knows? It's going to be crazy to think what we are going to be able to like how AI is going to affect how we think. And I think
Yeah.
it's going to be happening faster than we think it's going to be. In fact, I wrote a blog post about this, artificial agency, characters, trends, and social trends, and I'm writing a part two about it, about Hume, but about how we are going to see, I think, since we view AI tools as agents subconsciously, people are going to start believing it as going to become a source of authority, a source of, people going to know, actually think that the AI knows what it's talking about, and it doesn't. But another thing, incidentally, we were talking about Google, whistleblower at Google. Google AI now, Notebook LM, can turn your notes into a podcast, any content into a podcast. I made a podcast out of my blog post, actually. So it's kind of meta because they were talking about themselves as human beings. But it would turn into a podcast with two presenters, and they will talk about your ideas. And it actually came up with ideas and examples that I did not come up with, and it didn't follow my article structure. It followed a different one, and I was like, wow, it's not just generating, it's not taking my text like I thought it would, and just having one voice read something and one voice read another one. No, it's it was really creepy. It was like my first experience truly of Uncanny Valley was, yeah, crazy.
Well, you and I have these sort of core concerns, or at least I know I do, right? Which is with limited time, if the AI can do something better than a human would do, then why
Mhm.
would we listen to the human? Right now, I mean,
Yeah.
we might do it out of support or encouragement and the like, but if the information gleaned is better coming from the fake podcast with the notebook LM, why would I not want to listen to it? I'm going to want to listen to it. In the
Yeah.
same way, if I'm getting a voice that's a seductive female voice that's telling me the things I want to hear, I'm fighting against evolved Darwinian triggers to not listen to that and not be influenced by it. And you know that I feel very strongly that the combination of the psychological profiles that are built on us through the use of social media in
Mhm.
combination with AI that can customize responses to us individually is dangerous territory.
Yes.
So the
Well,
ability
yeah.
for it to be able to trigger feelings or thoughts in us is leading down a path where we're going to have to be really thoughtful about how we talk about this and its influence on us. In the same way that a child hearing Alexa thinks it's an actual person,
Yeah.
right? We're not immune to that. And especially if it knows kind of how to appeal to us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, yeah, not only is it going to make decisions with us or, have that be a thing, it's going to help this. I mean, it's helping institutions and organizations just already decide things about workers. I mean, AI, Google, one of the goals of Google, well, we'll talk about another one, but one of the first ones was is going to help decide whether unemployed workers get benefits. And who knows what data is going to be used to
College
analyze
admissions,
us. Yes, yeah,
job applications. Oh no, it's going to be profound. We're going to have to wrestle with all of these things. I will
yes,
say that my respect for Google has increased through this process,
yeah.
and it's sort of interestingly because I think they stumbled at the beginning of
Mhm.
this very short AI journey. And I'm disappointed with OpenAI because here I have this paid membership, but I still haven't gotten the full voice features. Strawberry was going to come out in November, and that's out early. And I mean, there are all these sort of ways in which I don't really understand what's going on, which it's weirdly unrelated to the quality of the content, but I don't feel the same level of um, confidence or trust. Meaning, if I'm really concerned about the use of AI to be manipulative,
Mhm.
I I also really want to understand the company behind it and how it's operating.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and how is it going to like, yeah, what is it trying to do in the future? In the future, what could it do that's going to, even if it's not doing anything right now, what is it
Yeah.
going to do years down the road that it could cause implications for me? And I mean, that's why I'm impressed that, I mean, with Google, another thing they're going to do is in 7 years, apparently they want to give AI tools a robot body, which OpenAI did talk about it. I don't know if they're actually working towards it, but now we know that Google is that they're going to put an AI in a robot body, have it act. We're going to be living literally now that AI can reason, quality check things and talk. We're not that far away from the positronic body of science fiction. So
No, I mean,
crazy.
well, the question of do we become silica versus
Yeah,
bio is is a larger question.
yes.
However, once that robot came out with the $16,000 price tag for the mass marketing, that are predicting that that you would have a very full functioning, highly agile robot, 4 foot tall robotic assistant,
Mhm.
that just seems inevitable, right? Which is, and then
Yeah,
you put some AI capabilities into it to respond and answer questions. Yeah, I have a really hard time believing that's not just going to become a reality. Now it'll become a reality for people with higher incomes, but I also think there will be solutions for people with lower incomes. Just a less agile body, but something that moves around. Or I mean, this is all making Google Home and Alexa seem so rudimentary, right? When I talk to my Google Home now, I want it to act like ChatGPT. I want better responses and better information, and I'd be happy with that before I, necessarily need a robot. But I think it's all coming.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
question
Well,
is, there's a lot of money being spent, a lot of investment being made. What will actually produce revenue for these companies to justify the enormous energy costs and the compute costs to providing it to us?
I don't know. And who's going to decide what it is? Yeah, exactly. Who's going to be in charge? Or is the AI going to be in charge? Is the AI going to decide what other AIs are doing? That's what we're talking about. Co-intelligence with Ethan Wallach. His seventh chapter talks about eventually we're going to have AI products by AI machines being graded by AI machines who are answerable to AI machines. So it's going to be, it's going to be from, hello Google or thank you Google to you're welcome Google. I'm serving you now, something like that.
Well, we don't
Um,
have to go too deep in the rabbit hole, but again,
yeah, a little bit. Yes,
another thing you and I have talked about is we're not rational beings,
that's true.
right? And I can't even remember, like, there are certain things where I think I should be able to remember what I ate 2 days ago, or when I last got my dog vaccinated. I mean, but my human memory is very fallible, and it's not rational and logical. And so there is this sort of question of, we're irrational beings trying to create a highly rational system, and what does that actually mean? Like, what
Yeah,
what value do we bring? Is it the agency? Is it the value of agency and decision making? You know, it is a dilemma to think that from a purely intellectual standpoint, the AI will be capable of making smarter, non-emotional decisions than us. And is it the scare story of Ex Machina, right, where there's no moral value, and so the AI just works based on survival?
mhm.
I hate to say that that's a possible model, but certainly we've used the model of her to talk about our enticements of building a personal relationship with AI. And Ex Machina is probably not a bad model for trying to think about what would it be like if the AI is actually capable of rational decisions. Is it like the Matrix or Terminator, where, oh, you actually make life on Earth harder, so we're going to bypass you
Yeah,
because you're not actually rational.
yeah. Well, and yeah, it'll be crazy to think. I just you say these things to I think, and it's just I can't even think. I can't even process.
Okay,
It's
so
just
Sam
anyway.
Altman quit the safety group.
Yes,
That
he
that
did.
news came out sort of like he quit in some way. Well, I think it was a planned shift in the safety group, because the safety group has lost
Yes.
so many members, to have an independent body. Now, it's not really fully independent because the members of the board are the safety group is composed of members of the board largely,
Mhm.
but the idea is to be able to present an external face that OpenAI is concerned about safety and security. I think the departure of Ilya Sutskever from OpenAI is not a huge positive for me in that regard. And,
Mhm.
and again, I'm just the consumer at this level looking at what's going on with OpenAI. And I don't have this sort of good vibe trust that they're going to make decisions that are good for the humanity in general versus what's good for OpenAI. And again, that's sort of part of the public perception. Do I trust the company? Do I feel like they have they're communicating honestly with me, and I feel good about it? It's important that there is a safety group, and I think they're making moves toward that. But it doesn't feel like it's actually really an independent safety group.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what priorities it has and how the priorities change. I would be more interested in if companies made a safety group that was a joint one, or if companies made a safety group that was, I mean, I don't know, or if it was a joint task force between government institutions and organizations, and there needs to be some way of communicating. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I
It just
agree.
because, but then when you treat an institution or a field like that, like it's different than other fields, then the stakeholders are like, well, you're discriminating against these institutions, or you're making decisions based on one institution that favors other ones. Or yeah, so yeah, it'll be intriguing to see what happens.
Yeah,
Um,
an enormous amount of power, money, and influence involved here. Decisions way above my pay grade, likely yours as well,
mhm.
but also worth saying, hey, there need to be checks and balances.
Yeah,
This kind of power can create temptations to do things, and we want to make sure that there's good accountability.
yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, are we done?
Yes, well, first of all, next week, or then on Friday, we have our custom AI GPT, our custom AI models presentation, a workshop. It's going to be excellent, so I encourage you all to join. It's going to be $130, $129 per person, correct? So really exciting. Really hope that all of you will be able to join us and create some tools. You're going to leave this with a tool that you're creating. So really exciting. But yes,
Good, good
see us
signups for
next
that
week.
already. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is being presented by our very own Reed Hepler.
Exciting.
Okay. Thanks, Reed. We'll talk
Yeah,
next
no
week.
problem. See ya.
Bye.